He's been on leadership positions all his life in the charity sector.
For me, I think anybody who wants to be in that sort of leadership position needs to be thinking about people all the time.
When you think of India, what's the one thing that comes to your mind?
Jugaad.
Jugaad indeed.
Jugaad it's my favourite word. There was a huge Indian community, but I just didn't know anything about it. The first couple of times I went to Ahmedabad, and for me, the roads were just absolute chaos. There were animals on the roads. Nobody was driving on the right side of the road. There were bikes and cars going in every direction, just people papping their horn all the time. I think I've learned from people in India every single time I've been. The only decision we should make about India from the UK is not to make decisions about India from the UK.
This is India, a story in the making. And I'm your host, Lavina Tandon.
Hello and welcome to India, a story in the making. If you are interested in the nuances of charity sector, specifically in South Asia and in that India and the UK, then this is the episode for you. But more than that, if you're interested to find out how to be in the leadership position, dealing with a lot of culturally different people with different backgrounds, culture backgrounds, then this is the space for you as well. Because the person today I am talking to is born and bred in England, very much an Englishman. And can you imagine, he knows the meaning of Jugaad. And I know a lot of you might not understand what it is, but I'm going to make you understand what really it is in English. And apart from that, he's been on leadership positions all his life in the charity sector, a big name in the charity finance, social finance as well. So I want to understand all of that from him, Richard Hawkes, CEO of British Asia Trust. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me, Lavina. Thank you.
First of all, Richard, when you told me you know what Jugaad is, I absolutely fell from my chair because I haven't been able to explain what that really means to my children as well. Please do me that favor.
So Jugaad it's my favourite word. It just sums up so much about the way that India works, about the way that people are always trying to find creative solutions to problems and creative solutions to different challenges. And there isn't an equivalent word in the English language, I don't think. But it's just a great word when, when people are looking to be creative, to be, well, that's the word, isn't it? To be creative, to find solutions, to really think about things in a very different way.
Yes.
And then often just come up with really great solutions for problems that people wouldn't have thought about. It means people trying to think creatively and to come up with solutions for challenges or solutions for problems by being a bit creative, by just thinking in a very different way.
Different way, just like you've done with the camera.
Yeah.
The camera person Moinderji forgot the thing and now he's mounted his camera on the line.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a problem and a solutions-focused country. I think people are always, whatever their situation in life, I think people are always trying to come up with positive solutions for things in India. It's been a great learning for me.
Have you ever used it personally in your life in any situation?
Oh, I try every day to think in a different way and to think of different ways of doing things. And so, my job, I'll often get, there'll often be challenges, and so for me, it's part of the culture of the organization to just try and keep thinking creatively.
Out of the box.
Out of the box. Constantly think creatively, be solutions focused.
Yes, perfect. So tell me, we've spoken and I've read about you. You grew up in Wolverhampton?
Yeah.
Tell me about your childhood a little bit, growing up and leading to this charity world.
Yeah.
Which is where you have been always.
So I grew up in Wolverhampton. That's a city in the Midlands for anybody who doesn't know. It's quite an industrial city. I was very lucky. I grew up in a very comfortable background. It was a very privileged background in many ways. But Wolverhampton is also one of the cities in the UK that has a very large Indian community. So I had Indian friends, but I didn't know a lot about them and a lot about the Indian culture. And so there's a lot of especially Sikhs, live in Wolverhampton. But I think until recently, so certainly when I was a child growing up, the communities weren't very integrated. The communities lived very separately. And so to my shame, really, there was a huge Indian community, but I just didn't know anything about Indian people. Whereas now, when I go back to see my dad, for example, who lives in Wolverhampton, there are Indian families that live in the same road as him, live across the road, and I'll spend hours talking to them about the journeys that they've been on, or that their parents came on, in terms of migrating and then setting up in the UK. And so now I'm absolutely fascinated by it. But as a child, I think the communities were very separate, and so I didn't really.
A lot has moved on.
A lot has changed.
A lot has changed indeed. And I think many of the people would not have visited India as many times as you have, in fact. How many?
So I've been to India more than 70 times. So, which I know I'm very lucky to have done. But yeah.
And you love it?
Oh, I love every single time I go. Every single time I go, I learn something new. I see something different. I think I've had a brilliant time every single time I've been. Yeah.
Oh, how wonderful. I am going to come to this 70, 75 times very soon. Okay. But let's just go through the moment when you realized you wanted to be in the charity sector. Was it in the college?
No, actually. So I've been, I was involved in the student union. I'd been elected to be the leader of the student union at Manchester University. I was then elected to be the national secretary of the National Union of Students. So I was involved in, for 4 years full time, in representing students and realizing the power of a collective voice, the power of collective action, and that together we can make the world a different place. I was then very fortunate. I went to work for the United Nations in Vienna, and I was working in the youth and student unit there. And it was during that time the war then happened in Yugoslavia, in what was Yugoslavia. And I got very involved in work with displaced students and young people from Bosnia, Croatia, as a result of the war. And after that, I realized that in the world there are a lot of people who are living in very unfortunate circumstances, very disadvantaged, living in poverty, and so on. There are other people that have power. There are other people that have money, and that in the not-for-profit sector, you can bring all of that together. And so if you're working in a charity or in the not-for-profit world, you can work with the people who are living in pretty terrible situations at times, and then try and be a link between them and people that can make decisions and people that have money to make things happen. And so that was when I wanted to work in the charity sector.
Was there any particular incident that actually connected you, made you realize that this is where I belong?
So actually, when I was in the Students' Union, there was a time when there were 2 Kurdish students actually came to talk to me, and they wanted to tell me about the situation in Iraq, what the situation was like for Kurds living with Saddam Hussein, how persecuted they were. And again, to my shame, I didn't know anything about this. I'd only heard about Saddam Hussein through the sort of, the media. I didn't know much about it. But these 2 students, they kept making me realize that I was in a position where I could do something about it. And so I was in my early 20s. And up
What did they say to you?
Well, they kept saying that I could use the platform that I'd got as the president of the student union to raise awareness, to be supportive, to talk to people about that situation. And I'd never realized the sort of agency that I had, and that ability to be able to support other people. And so it was a real eye-opener for me that there were people who were living in awful circumstances in a totally different part of the world, but they believed that there was something I could do that would support and help them. And so that was quite an early age to realize that we have this sort of power and influence and ability to help change other people's lives to the better. And so I think that was probably the moment when I realized that actually this is something that's really important.
This is what you did do something that to help. To raise.
Yeah, I did loads. I raised a lot of awareness about what they were doing. When I became national secretary, of the National Union of Students. I'd stayed in touch with them. There was a national group. I spoke at their conferences. I promoted their issues, and I helped make some of those international issues, raise awareness of them so that more students who might not necessarily think about those kinds of issues started to become more aware of them.
Yes, that made you. I think that's what happens. So sometimes if you can make a difference, and that's where you thought that this is where I belong.
Yes,
Okay.
no, exactly.
So you've been through a lot of journeys through the charity sector, and then you arrived at British Asian Trust.
Yeah.
Tell me about your work here, and specifically in India.
Yeah, so I've been very lucky. I've had some great jobs in the charity sector. I've been chief executive of a number of organizations. Most of the time I've worked in international development, and most of that time India has been one of the countries that I've worked in. So that's why I had the pleasure of going so many times over the last 30 years. The opportunity with the British Asian Trust, so I started here about 8 years ago now, and it just had the most potential that I'd ever seen in any organization. The whole ethos and the DNA of the organization was very different to any other charity that I'd come across. The ambition, the scale of ambition, the people that were involved. I just thought there was going to be a huge learning opportunity here and an organization that had huge potential to make a massive difference. And so I'm very lucky to get that job at that time and then be a part of the journey ever since.
Yeah, King Charles. I still have to learn. King Charles is the patron.
Yes.
Isn't it? I came to your function. I heard him at that time. How far is he involved, and what kind of stuff? What has been your experience in dealing with him?
Yeah, so the king, when he was the Prince of Wales, he helped set the organisation up. So originally it had been his idea. He's passionate about South Asia. He's passionate about doing good and changing the world. He's passionate about the British Asian community. And so it was his idea to create this organisation. And he worked with a number of very successful British Asians to set up the organisation. So he is officially what's called our royal founding patron. And he's actively interested. He's been supportive throughout the whole of the 8 years that we've been going. He wants information about what we're doing. He has ideas about what we're doing. He's brilliantly supportive of things. And he always wants to know about the visited projects. He's visited schools. He's hugely supportive of our social finance work. And so he's taught at events about things like that. So that's what I had the pleasure of focusing on with him when he's there.
Brilliant. Social finance, you brought me to it. Very quickly, I want to touch about, and you have worked hugely in this sector. Tell me more about social bonds or the development bonds and the social finance, and how do you bring the traditional investment into social finance?
Yeah. So social finance is, I would summarize it as, it's just a different way of financing and delivering development programs and charitable activity. So there's the traditional approach is to raise philanthropy and then give out grants to organizations for the work that everybody has agreed that they should do. In effect, social finance is a way of using, and is a way of delivering results that both have financial benefits and social outcomes. And so we've done a number of what are called development impact bonds. And they're actually not that complicated. You focus at the start on what's the outcome that you're trying to achieve. And then you use different kinds of money to pay for those results, but someone else finds the capital that will allow the work to happen in the first place. So what it is it focuses everyone on impact and outcomes rather than paying for activities and initiatives that people think are good ideas. And so it enables you to raise more money, but to get that money focused only on success. And then there are people that will get a financial return on their investment, or people that the projects overall will deliver a social outcome, a social return. So there's benefits to all of the different people that are part of the structure.
Indeed. And in this world today, when there is so much of financial, we're all stretched financially. the countries are stretched because of the wars going on. What are the challenges you face, and how do you drive this point that this is where finance should be used?
Yes. So the great thing with development impact bonds and social finance is that people only pay if it is successful. And so it's a results-based financing structure. So people are only paying for success. So if you're, for example, a government and you want to pay for education, then you would only pay once people have achieved the qualifications or the learning objectives that you want to achieve. If you set up, we've got a development impact bond that's all about jobs, and the people who pay only pay when the young people secure a job and when they're still in a job. And so it's not like paying for a training program when you then don't know if somebody's going to get a job or not. You only pay once someone gets a job. So for me, what this does is it de-risks that funding. It means that government funding or donor funding is totally de-risked and people are only paying for success. So in a world where there are more demands on funding, to have a structure that takes away any risk and these people are only paying for success means that you're making all of those funds much more efficient and much more effective, as opposed to paying for things that might not work.
And how do you get on the social stock exchange, and how does that, there's no return to investment, but there is a social impact
Yes.
of that.
So there's a social stock exchange in India now. There used to be a social stock exchange in the UK as well. And I think there are one or two others around the world. So what that does is it basically enables us as the British Asian Trust in India to be listed as part of something where people that want to invest in creative programs will see that this is a way of doing it. And so it helps to develop awareness about the work that we're doing, and it helps to attract funders that might want to get involved in that work.
And it goes through checks and balances. People can be assured that.
Yes, so you've got to, there are criteria that has to be fulfilled and due diligence that has to be fulfilled, and then to get listed. So you've got to have the credibility and you've got to have demonstrated the impact of what you're doing, for sure.
So we come back to so many times now you go to India. Your British Asian Trust runs a lot of programs there. Tell me your experience of the social sector in India.
So I love the social sector in India, and I thought for many years there's so much that the social sector in the UK can learn from the sector in India. I would say that over the last 15 years or so, it's changed enormously. So I think when I first started working in India 30 years ago, it was very, what I would call a more traditional approach. There were lots of founder-led NGOs, there were thousands, hundreds of thousands of NGOs, and people were trying to mainly raise money from outside India. And so people would be writing applications to donors that were outside India. If you jump forward to today, there's a lot of money in India. There are a lot of people that want to fund good work in India. There are a lot of Indian philanthropists in India. There's the Indian CSR legislation for corporates. So there's an increasing amount of funding within India to fund good work and the not-for-profit sector. And I think the not-for-profits themselves have totally changed in terms of the way that they exist, the way that they seek to focus on impact and results. There's a much more dynamic approach. And so it's really changed over the last 30 years, but more so over the last 15, when it used to be more traditional. It used to be more old-fashioned, let's apply to funds outside India. Whereas now there's a much more dynamic culture. People are much more focused on being efficient and effective, focused on results, focused on outcomes. People are seeking investment. There's a much more social entrepreneurial approach rather than a sort of old-fashioned charity approach. And it means that the results of what's happening are often absolutely amazing. And so the impact that's being made as a result of a much more dynamic approach is absolutely tremendous. And that links to the fact that there's now much more money available within India. That's just totally changed the whole narrative and the whole way that development works.
Indeed. So what is the reason behind this change, you think, in the last 15 years or 10 years?
So I think there's been a number of drivers. The one, India has been globally successful in with its economy, and so that there are far more middle class people now in India than there were 20 years ago. So there are far more successful people there, far more philanthropists now in India. So there are more people in India that want to give away money to good causes. The CSR legislation that was introduced, that's also shifted people's thinking. And a lot of corporates now recognize that they've got responsibilities to not only give 2% of the profits towards CSR, but to also think about their footprints and their impacts and their environmental and their social impacts. And so all of those things have combined together with the fact that as India has become a much more successful country, then a lot of the big development agencies around the world, they've got other priorities. If they're going to focus on poorer countries, then they don't need to put their funds towards India. So what that has meant is that India has taken control of its own destiny much more, including in the social sector. So that combination of all of those things, the corporate changes, more middle-class people, more funding in India, a desire for Indian people to address the causes and the issues in India themselves, that combination of all of those things has driven this change.
How brilliant. You have worked forever in charity, even
Forever?
from very
Time.
since you were a child in the university. And so you've seen the charity sector in the UK and you've seen the charity sector in India, and you've seen the attitudes of people. Is there any different change, similarity, dissimilarity, or something between the two attitudes? Or is
I think the attitudes in India have changed a lot. So I think over the last 30 years, the nature of the organizations, the kinds of organizations that exist, the fact that things are much more about social enterprise, social entrepreneurial, focus on impact, people seeking investments, focus on results, outcomes.
has had a purpose in their business?
And certainly that. But if you look at the UK charity sector, it hasn't changed anywhere near as much. So the UK charity sector is now still pretty similar to how it was 30 years ago. So I've worked in the sector for 30 years, and there hasn't been as big a change as certainly as there has been in India.
In the attitudes of people, is there any difference between how people of different countries approach being charitable?
Yes, for sure there are different approaches, and I think that's impacted by what's the role of the state. So if you look at some of the Scandinavian countries, for example, they don't need as many charities because the state is providing quality education, quality health. People have different opportunities in life, so you don't need a charity sector to sort of step in and do a lot of that work. There are some countries where you still need a strong charity sector because the gaps in what the state is providing are too great, and so charities need to be in there providing that, and so that then has an impact on the way that the wider public think about charities. And so I think in a country like the UK, there's a huge amount of charitable giving, and the general public are hugely generous in the way that they give funds. I think in a country like India, increasingly people are thinking about the social sector and thinking about not-for-profits, but I think there's still that wider journey to go on for the much larger population in terms of people automatically wanting to give to charity all the time.
What is it that the charity sector in the UK can possibly learn or from the new, growing, different approach of Indian sector?
So I think in the private sector, if there's no demand for what the private sector is producing, then those companies cease to exist. In the Indian social sector, I think if organizations, if people don't want to support them and they can't raise funds and there's no clear purpose for them, then they cease to exist. Whereas I think in the UK, there's a lot of charities that are into self-preservation and self-sustaining. And rather than people being brutally honest and saying, well, we were set up 70 years ago do we need to exist in exactly the same way as we did 70 years ago? Do we actually need to exist at all? And there's a lot of duplication in the UK charity sector. There are lots of charities that are doing very, very similar work. And that's often driven by founders or trustees or chief executives that don't want to collaborate as much as they can. And so there should be more mergers. The sector could be more efficient. If you've got to pay 2 chief executives to do 2 different jobs of 2 charities that are very similar, there could be a big saving there in only having 1 chief executive and bringing those charities together.
Be more frugal
Right.
and be more creative in how you spend and use your money.
We should be absolutely ruthless about every penny that's given to a charity should be maximized for the impact that the charity seeks to exist. And I think in the UK, there's a lot of duplication of overheads. There's a lot of duplication of charities. There's people will often set up a new charity rather than looking and seeing, is there another charity that we could join hands with and maybe have an appeal in somebody's name rather than setting up a different charity?
Yes, indeed.
So I think there are different ways of doing
Stuff, yes, indeed. And this whole question about funding to India.
Yeah.
What's your view on that?
Yeah, so I think there are lots of people that want to support and develop us in India. However successful India has been and continues to be as a country, there are still lots of challenges. There's still a lot of poverty in India. I think that India is increasingly solving those challenges itself. But there are still people, especially in the Indian diaspora, that want to support developments and keep building India and making it a more successful country. We also saw during COVID, when the oxygen crisis happened in India, that the British Asian Trust, we were able to galvanize support, and we raised £10 million to support oxygen in an emergency situation in India. So there are still definitely times when reaching out to the wider diaspora and to people that want to support India is going to be the right thing to do. And so I think it's, certainly for the time being, it's absolutely right that people are able to do that.
Any proud moment of any story that sticks or hits at you when you think of your work in India?
Honestly, there are things like that happen every time I go. I go when I have the good fortune in my job. I get to see the impact of the work that we're making. I get to visit the programs, visit the projects, see the kids that we've been providing education for, see the kids that are getting jobs as a result of having a better education. And so for me, it's just constantly that when you're being part of a program that might have helped children that have been trafficked, and then you see them in a school environment and they're turning their lives around. When you see young women who didn't have a chance of getting a job and they've been through a training program and they're now in a job, or they're set up their own business, it's the most rewarding thing you can possibly be involved in.
Longest period that you've stayed in India, and what's been your experience? But usually people they say, I can smell India before I touch India. And they get put off by the kiosks. What was your first reaction when you went for the first time?
So the very first time I went was about 30 years ago. And I remember I started off in Mumbai, and I just couldn't believe the noise, the chaos, the sounds, the colors, the smells.
Yeah.
And I just absolutely loved it. And even now, I'm rarely happier than just watching India. And so most people, for example, hate the traffic in Mumbai, and even with Sea-Link, there's still a lot of traffic in Mumbai. You can put me in a car in Mumbai and I'll just more than happily watch out of the window, watch the world happening, watch what people are doing, watch those lights. Put me on a train in India and I just watch out of the window, watch what's going on in the villages, the towns as you go through. I just find it absolutely fascinating. There's always interesting things going on.
How is it speaking to you when you watch? What is it that it is doing to you that makes you interested?
It's just telling me that people are doing. I'm fascinated by the lives that people are leading. That you see in the cities, you'll see people people have set up businesses on the side of the road. People are, you've got, hairdressers and barbers just, sitting on the side of, you've got amazing shops. Now you've got incredible, superstores and all of that, So the diversity of it all, the proximity of, of different people's lives, and just the way that people are making things happen. As an outsider, when you're first there, I remember being in Ahmedabad the first couple of times I went to Ahmedabad, and for me the roads were just absolute chaos. There were animals on the roads. Nobody was driving on the right side of the roads. There were bikes and cars going in every direction. Just people popping their horn all the time, and yet it worked. Somehow it worked, and so there's that sort of, somehow these things happen, and it just, so it's not chaotic. It just appears like that. But it's the noises and the smells and the sounds are just, they're so enriching and so fascinating. And so for me, that's every time I've been, it's been like that. Yeah.
How has it changed or impacted you in any way?
As a person,
Yes.
I think I've learned from people in India every single time I've been. I think I always remember the first couple of times I went, how interested everybody was in me. And that was not about me at all. It was about them. It was because they were just interested in difference, in finding out about things, that curiosity. And for me, I just absolutely loved it. And so that's made me more curious and more, that's why I love just sitting in traffic jams and looking out the window and just trying to work out what's going on. How's that happening? What are they doing?
Yeah.
And
how is chaos working?
Yeah. And also, and the other thing is, I always remember one of my first visits to India. I was in rural Gujarat, and I'd gone to visit a family in a village in Gujarat that had a disabled child. And I sat with the community, and it got to sunset time, and the whole community came out, and everyone was sitting in the middle of the village, and the village elders were talking about things, and the kids were playing, and the adults were all talking to each other, and it was just absolutely amazing. And somebody turned to me and asked me, "Is this what happens in London at sunset?" And it just made me realize the strength of community, the strength of community that doesn't happen in London. There are lots of people in London who don't even know the names of their next door neighbor. And yet here, in what was supposed to be poverty, it was actually richer because of the nature of the people. And you just saw the strength of that community. And that family that had the disabled child were fully part of the community. Everybody was looking out for that family. Everybody was making sure that child was part of the village and part of the community. And that struck me right, and that's had a massive impact all of my life, just seeing that in India.
Okay. I want to ask you some leadership hacks, Richard, before we go to our high five section.
Great.
You have been always on the top of your game and in the leading positions in every organization. What is the secret behind that? Despite the fact that you're working with culturally diverse people.
So I think I've been really lucky. I was elected president of my student union. I became national secretary of the National Union of Students. I was appointed to be the chief executive of an international disability organization when I was quite young. Part of it, I genuinely think, is in most other parts of an organization, apart from being the chief exec, you have to have brilliant skills. And I'm not sure I'm particularly skilled in any of those areas. I couldn't be the finance director. I couldn't be the programs director. I don't know enough about monitoring and evaluation. I don't know, so all of those areas, there are real experts in those different areas.
How would you get yourself in that position? What is it you?
So for me, it's been more, I've been very fortunate to be in those leadership positions. And then obviously I've learned about leadership. I've adapted my leadership style.
Must tell that I am there to lead. I can make everyone work and to a common goal. What is it growing up, I feel? There must be something, a kind of confidence.
Well, I think my family and friends would probably say that came from being an eldest child that always wanted to be in charge. There probably is some truth in that. But I think for me, it's about, I enjoy taking on responsibility. I enjoy the pressure of responsibility. And when you're a chief executive, it can be a very lonely place to be. And there's a lot of responsibility. And that can be quite stressful at times, and it can be quite pressured. And I sort of relish that challenge of doing that. So, and now obviously throughout my life, I've adapted the way that I lead and the way that I work according to my own experience, the organization, and so on. But ultimately, I think I've always relished that challenge of accepting that ultimate responsibility.
So if someone was, let's say, in your position, wanting to apply in the charity sector, what is your leadership toolkit?
Yeah, well, first of all, if people, to apply to the charity sector, increasingly it's quite challenging to get into the charity sector. But I've never known anyone who wanted to work in the charity sector who hasn't been able to do so in the end. And so there are lots of ways of getting into the charity sector. I think the other thing is people need to really recognize there are some brilliant jobs and brilliant careers within the charity sector. So, you can be a finance director, you can be a lawyer, you can be a pilot and work in the charity sector. And so you're working for organizations that have got a purpose to do good, as opposed to maybe working in another sector. So the opportunities are absolutely enormous. There are great careers, and it's hugely satisfying. And so anybody who wants to get into it ultimately can, if they work out the way of doing that. To get into a leadership position, it's got to be about the interpersonal skills, about the abilities to connect with people, the ability to really understand people and what motivates people. And so for me, that's always what gives me the most satisfaction, is trying to, when you're leading an organization, you're trying to get all of the people in the organization galvanized behind a particular vision, motivated, wanting to come into work every day, wanting to enjoy themselves. And so for me, I think anybody who wants to be in that sort of leadership position needs to be thinking about people all the time, and how you're working with people, how you're understanding people, how you're building those relationships with people.
When you're interviewing someone, what makes them hireable what is it that they should portray that will make you, you are hired?
So there's a number of things that you're looking for. And I think the important thing to remember is that no one person is better than another person. And so when I'm recruiting, I'm not looking for who's the best person. I'm looking for who's going to be the best fit for this job and in this organization. And that could be very different people. And so for some roles, I will need a qualified accountant, because in that finance role, you need somebody who's got those qualifications. And so I would be really looking in some roles for the technical experience, the technical skills that people have got.
In terms of personal thing, is there something that stands out?
Again, it really does depend on the job. There are, in any organization, there'll be a huge variety of different personalities. There'll be some people that are really introverts. There'll be some people that are really extroverts. And all of that is totally fine. And so it really depends on the job. If I'm recruiting for a position where it's somebody who needs to be out supporting and engaging with our supporters and talking to our supporters all the time and building those relationships, then I'm looking for a different kind of personality than if I'm recruiting somebody who needs to do research or write applications, for example. That's a different kind of personality. And so I don't think there's a sort of blanket response there. It really depends on the role.
Yeah. But if a child is wanting to work possibly in the charity sector, what are the kind of traits that they should have?
Okay, so I'm quite unusual here. So I look, on the one hand, I think academic qualifications are hugely important, and I would encourage anybody to do as well as they can in their academic qualifications, because that will open up more opportunities for them. However, for me, I don't really look too much at the academic qualifications that somebody might have. I'm far more interested in the kind of things that somebody might have done, the kinds of experiences that they've got, the way that they approach different situations and scenarios. So if I was interviewing a young person and there was somebody who'd been traveling, got a job while they were traveling, done some voluntary work, that for me would be really, really important, because it would show me much more about their personality, their aptitude, the kind of approach to things, than academic qualifications.
Life experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wonderful. Thank you.
When you think of India, what's the one thing that comes to your mind?
Jugaad.
Jugaad indeed. Okay. When you came onto this job or any job, what is the one advice you'd give to people who want to work in the charity sector or maybe in your job? The solution to India's issues or problems?
Okay, if anybody who wants to work in India, you've got to realise that we know nothing in the UK, and the solutions for India will be developed in India. So the very first job that I had, I was asked to give us, after I'd been there 3 months, I was asked to present a strategy for India. And my presentation said, the only decision we should make about India from the UK is not to make decisions about India from the UK. And I would absolutely stick to that, that our role is to play a role in trying to empower and enable the people who are going to be most directly affected by anything that you do to have the strongest say in those decisions that are made.
Brilliant. What is the one thing about India that people don't get and misunderstand from here?
The people, I don't think that I don't think people realize that there are people living in so many different circumstances in India, and a lot of the time, you can go to rural India and people are living very poor, simple lives, but they can be very, very happy. And the strength of those communities is absolutely amazing. And so, of course, there are lots of people in India living in pretty awful circumstances and awful situations. But as a rule, most of the people that I've met in the 30 years and the 70-odd visits to India have just been absolutely incredible. And I think just understanding that the strength of the people, the desire of the people to be supportive, to build those relationships is just brilliant.
And happiness is not dependent on money all the time.
Happiness is very rarely dependent on money, I would say. I think there are, unfortunately, most people think that money is going to make them happier, but a lot of people, it doesn't make them happier. Now, of course, money can give you opportunities and give you choices, but it's then what you do with it. A lot of people are a lot happier when they start giving their money away.
Yeah, I know. I remember I went to India and Bandhavgarh very recently, and those people didn't have any electricity in the house, so they used to get up with the sun and sundown they'll sleep. And my son was very upset, and I thought, no, actually, did you see? Actually, they are living the life that we all want to live after earning so much.
And it's very easy. I think people do this all the time. They make judgments about other people's quality of life.
Yes.
And what we do is look at somebody else's life and then apply that to ours. So I used to work in disability, and there are lots of people that think, oh, it would be, how awful it must be to be a wheelchair user. Most wheelchair users I know lead great lives, and are perfectly happy and love their lives.
Yes.
And people make assumptions about other people's quality of lives, and we should never do that. There are people that are living very different lives, and actually sometimes if you look at people living in rural parts of India, the simplicity and the strength of the community is much better than anything that we've got.
That's absolutely true. Okay, the one food that you most enjoy, Indian.
Dal.
Can you make it?
No. I'm rubbish at cooking, but I love thicker, heavier dal.
The kali dal, maki dal, or
I love it all. I love it. I love all Indian food, to be honest. I love it. That's enough. I can be anywhere in India and I'll eat the food anywhere, and I've always been absolutely fine.
Have you sat down on the floor and
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Oh, brilliant. Okay.
Yeah.
One leadership quality in you that has got you where you are?
Curiosity. Yeah, so constantly wanting to know more, wanting to understand people, asking questions all the time. I think, yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. Are you ready?
Advice.
There you are on that high five note. Thank you very much, Richard. Richard Hawkesford, CEO of British Asian Trust, but he wears a lot of hats and he has done a lot of work. So do find out about him and the work that the trust does. And I want you to be finding out about what all you want us to bring on this platform for you. Stay connected with us. Thank you so very much. Listen to my podcast audio on Apple, Spotify, BingePods, or wherever you get your podcast from. And watch the video of the podcast on my YouTube channel, Lavina Tandon. New episodes are out every Sunday.